welcome everybody to the second half of my Travels with Charley talk. I'm so grateful that I've been given the opportunity to complete my talk, and I want to welcome you all to this second half of my talk. I'm just going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to sort of backtrack just a little bit, and I'm going to go to the Steinbeck Center in Salinas, California, and again just to backtrack just a few slides back so we can sort of catch up. I was here back in October 15th of 2003. And John Steinbeck was born in Salinas, and the folks in Salinas decided to build this beautiful museum in his honor. And of course, I visited here. Steinbeck also on his journey around the country went to his home, his boyhood home, to visit Salinas. And of course, I wanted to be here too. And while at the Steinbeck Center, I got to see Rocinante, is the vehicle that Steinbeck used to travel around the country in his journey. This is the vehicle, the actual vehicle is in the Steinbeck Center, and it was wonderful to see it. And of course, I think I also told you that I ate lunch at the Steinbeck Center, and I sat by this mural. That's my red jacket there in that chair. And I sat right by this mural. And I didn't look at it very closely, but I sort of glanced at it. I noticed there were some people I recognized, like there was Henry Fonda and Marilyn Monroe, Jimmy Dean, and Clark Gable, and I realized they were all actors that appeared in movies based on Steinbeck's books. And throughout my journey, I felt like Steinbeck was with me in a way, helping me, guiding me, encouraging me along. And I looked closely at the mural again after my lunch, and I looked to my right, and John Steinbeck was sitting right next to me, which was kind of a neat thing. And so that's him right in the center of the mural, and I was sitting right there, and I didn't realize John Steinbeck was there while I was having lunch until I looked more closely, but it was kind of a neat thing to see that. But from the Steinbeck Center, I went to, here's a picture of Steinbeck and Charley again. But from the Steinbeck Center, I went to the Fremont State Park, Fremont Peak State Park. And Steinbeck visited here after he spent some time in Salinas and Monterey, again, his boyhood home. He came to Fremont Peak State Park for a visit because it has this commanding view of the entire Salinas Valley. And let me read to you what I wrote in my journal about my being here at this spot. From the National Steinbeck Center, I drove to Fremont Peak State Park. Now, the peak provides a commanding view of the Salinas Valley in Monterey from its 3,100-foot summit. John Steinbeck drove here for one last look at his beloved Salinas Valley before turning east to begin the long trip home to Long Island, New York. Now, I saw only what the eye could see from that grand location, the neat patterns so pleasing to the eye of rich brown soil and the green fields of the valley, the city of Salinas spread out below, and off toward the horizon, the Monterey Peninsula extending into the blue Pacific Ocean. Now, Steinbeck looked upon the scene with knowing eyes, with a depth and a sense of place that I could only imagine. He wrote poignantly of his visit to this beautiful spot. Let me read you what John Steinbeck wrote about his visit to this spot. Quote, "I drove up to Fremont's Peak, the highest point for many miles around. I climbed the last spiky rocks up to the top. Here, among the blackened granite outcrops, General Fremont made his stand against a Mexican army and defeated it. When I was a boy, we occasionally found cannonballs and rusted bayonets in the area. This solitary stone peak overlooks the whole of my childhood and youth, the great Salinas Valley stretching south for nearly 100 miles, the town of Salinas, where I was born, now spreading like crabgrass toward the foothills. Mount Toro, on the Brother Range to the west, was a rounded, benign mountain, and to the north, Monterey Bay shone like a blue platter. I felt and smelled and heard the wind blow up from the long valley. It smelled of brown hills of wild oats. I remembered how once, in that part of youth that is deeply concerned with death, I wanted to be buried on this peak where, without eyes, I could see everything I knew and loved, for in those days, there was no world beyond the mountains. And I remembered how intensely I felt about my interment. It is strange and perhaps fortunate that when one's time grows nearer, one's interest in it flags as death becomes a fact rather than a pageantry. Here on these high rocks, my memory myth repaired itself. Charley, having explored the area, sat at my feet, his fringed ears blowing like laundry on a line. His nose, moist with curiosity, sniffed the wind-borne pattern of 100 miles. You wouldn't know it, my Charley, that right down there in that little valley, I fished for trout with your namesake, my Uncle Charley. And over there, see where I'm pointing? My mother shot a wildcat. Straight down there, 40 miles away, our family ranch was, old Starvation Ranch. Can you see that darker place there? Well, that's a tiny canyon with a clear and lovely stream bordered with wild azaleas and fringed with big oaks. And on one of those oaks, my father burned his name with a hot iron, together with the name of the girl he loved. In the long years since, the bark grew over the burn and covered it. And just a little while ago, a man cut that oak for firewood, and his splitting wedge uncovered my father's name, and the man sent it to me. In the spring, Charley, when the valley is carpeted with blue lupines like a flowery sea, there's the smell of heaven up here, the smell of heaven. I printed it once more on my eyes, south, west, and north, and then we hurried away from the permanent and changeless past, where my mother is always shooting a wildcat, and my father is always burning his name with his love. That was my experience up there, and of course Steinbeck wrote about it as I could not imagine, but to him this was a view of heaven for him, seeing his boyhood home. And as Steinbeck did, we both started heading east, went through Bakersfield, and I drove up into the Mojave Desert, high into the desert. It was a long climb, and my car barely making it, but drove up into the Mojave Desert. And I went to the Grand Canyon. Now Steinbeck did not go to the Grand Canyon. Steinbeck, he didn't particularly like visiting national parks. He felt that, quote, they enclosed the unique, the spectacular, the astounding, the greatest waterfall, the deepest canyon, the highest cliff, the most stupendous work of man or nature. For it is my opinion that we enclose and celebrate the freaks of our nature and of our civilization. A national park is no more representative of America than is Disneyland. That's what Steinbeck wrote about national parks. But I wanted to visit Yellowstone. The Grand Canyon. I had been there years earlier, but the Grand Canyon is an absolutely spectacular place. I wish Steinbeck had come here. I wish he had stopped to see it, and I would have loved to have heard or read what he might have wrote about this place. Again, I was here many years ago and came back again on my Travels with Charley journey around the country, stopping here. Once you've seen the Grand Canyon, if you look at it and turn around and then look at it again, it'll be like you've seen it for the first time. It's just that spectacular. So I spent a couple of days here, and loved every minute of it. And from there, from visiting the Grand Canyon, I continued my journey east, and I stopped and just passed just past, I believe it was Flagstaff. I came upon a scene that I'd like to show you my next slide. This is Meteor Crater in Arizona, just past Flagstaff. It's a huge hole in the ground. It's about 3/4 of a mile wide. It was formed about 50,000 years ago when a meteor struck the Earth. They think it weighed several hundred tons and was about 150 feet wide. It caused this hole in the ground, this crater. It's, again, about 3/4 of a mile wide, and it's deeper than the Statue of Liberty is tall. So it's quite a place. And of course, I was interested in this kind of thing and still am today. So I'm glad I had a chance to stop there. Steinbeck did not go to this place. Past the Continental Divide in just outside of Gallup, New Mexico. Interesting place because, as you can see, if rain falls to the left of this side, it's going to empty out into the Pacific Ocean or the Baja or the Sea of Cortez. And if rain falls to the right of this sign, it's going to empty into either the Atlantic Ocean or into the Gulf of Mexico. This is where this is the Continental Divide. Kind of interesting place. Continuing my journey, I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then I took a right turn, and I headed on Route 25, took a turn south to El Paso to visit my Uncle Mike, my Aunt Anita, and their sons Lance and Barry, and their lovely families. Now, John Steinbeck did not visit El Paso. He continued traveling east on Route 40, stopping near Amarillo, Texas, where he again met his wife at a friend's ranch for a lavish Thanksgiving dinner. Though Steinbeck's and my path diverged at this point, we both came to Texas to get reacquainted with family, to be refreshed in their company. Now, I spent 3 heartfelt days with my family, getting to know them as I had never known them before. For that, I will always be grateful, and for the much needed rest. So I didn't go to Amarillo as Steinbeck had done, but again, wanting to make this trip my own, I went down to visit my cousins and my Uncle Mike and Aunt Anita as well. And from there, from El Paso, I traveled, continuing east. I went to San Antonio, Texas, where I visited the Dolores del Rio, the River Walk. The San Antonio River goes through San Antonio, and the good citizens of San Antonio decided to make this beautiful walk right beside the river. Just a beautiful spot, upscale stores and shops and restaurants, and just a beautiful place. And I spent some time there. And coming back in the evening, I took this shot, sort of a time exposure. You might notice that boat in the water looks kind of blurry. I took maybe a 3 or 4 second time exposure, trying to get this exposure right. And you could see this same scene I was in before, but I was on a bridge looking down at the scene and those beautiful umbrellas there as well. And after dinner, I went to the Alamo. I wanted to see this spot. Now, the comment most people make upon first seeing it is that it appears so small. And that's because one's eye is drawn first to the church, the iconic image that has most often been seen by people and is only part of what once was a larger compound. All that remains of the Alamo is the church, which today is a shrine dedicated to the memory of the men who died in defense of it. Also remaining is the long barrack, where infantrymen were housed and artillery was stored. The large north and south redoubts are no longer present. Instead, there's a large open plaza where the redoubts used to be. And behind the church and barrack is a network of paths leading to the museum, library, and meeting area. It's a very solemn and commanding place, the cornerstone of Texas history. There's an armed guard posted outside the Alamo 24 hours a day. A sign advised me to remove my hat as I entered the shrine. The knowledgeable docents reminded visitors that we are standing on hallowed ground. Now, outside in the meeting area behind the church, I listened to a stirring performance given by a staff member recounting the historical events leading up to the Battle of the Alamo and the 13-day losing struggle to keep it out of Mexican hands, and the eventual defeat of Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto near present-day Houston, leading to the signing of the peace treaty between Texas and Mexico and the independence of Texas. The presentation ended with the rousing words, "Remember the Alamo," as you would expect. So it was a very nice visit to this spot. So I went there in the evening to take this picture, and then I went there the next day to witness what I described in that little bit of my journal that I just read to you. And then after visiting the Alamo on that day, that evening I went to the 750-foot tall Tower of the Americas during dinner. It's much like the Space Needle in Seattle, where you go to the top and there's a wonderful restaurant, and the restaurant makes a revolution about every hour or so. So you get a continuing view of the beautiful San Antonio area as the restaurant slowly rotates inside the enclosure. And I was there for, I would say, about 320 degrees. Translates to about 2 hours, just to let you know. So it was really enjoyable to have a nice leisurely dinner up in that tower. Continuing my journey east, I stopped at Houston. Stopped in Houston, where I visited the Johnson Space Center. Wonderful visit. I really enjoyed the ride through the complex and going into some of the buildings, where I got to see some futuristic spacecraft, as well as going into some of the control rooms where space flights were controlled from. So it was really a very interesting visit to stop in Houston. And from Houston, I drove to New Orleans, as Steinbeck had done. Our paths converged again in Houston, in New Orleans. And I'd like to read to you what I wrote about my visit to New Orleans and Steinbeck's visit as well. I'll read to you several quotes from Steinbeck. From Houston, I drove to New Orleans, Louisiana, where John Steinbeck's and my path converged once again. I came to New Orleans because Steinbeck had come to this place in his travels with Charley, and I too wanted to see the city, a place to which I had never been before. By the way, I was there on October 31st of 2003. Steinbeck came here not because he wanted to. He was reluctant to travel through the South because, quote, "Here I knew where pain and confusion and all the manic results of bewilderment and fear were pain and confusion and all the manic results of bewilderment and fear. And the South being a limb of the nation, its pain spreads out to all America," close quote. Now remember, this was 1960 when Steinbeck and Charley went on their journey. The civil rights movement was in its infancy, but enmity was already at a high level, and confrontations were becoming violent. Now Steinbeck came to New Orleans to witness firsthand the vicious taunting of a little black schoolgirl trying to integrate the local school system, and of a white man who had the courage to bring his white child to the same school while all others remained home. They were being taunted by a group of mothers calling themselves the cheerleaders. And Norman Rockwell captured the scene in a painting entitled "Problem We All Live With," in which a little black girl is walking towards school in her finest white dress, surrounded by 4 federal agents who are guarding her. Now, perhaps you've seen this painting. Steinbeck had read the accounts of the taunting in newspapers and seen it on television, but neither media outlet could ever fully expose the vile nature of the verbal assault. He wanted to hear and witness it uncensored. Steinbeck wrote, quote, "This strange drama seemed so improbable that I felt I had to see it," quote, close quote. He left Rocinante in a parking lot at the edge of town and took a taxi downtown, believing that had someone close to the scene witnessed the camper's New York license plate, he or she might consider Steinbeck an outsider, a troublemaker. Of the scene itself, Steinbeck wrote the following, quote, "The show opened on time, sound of sirens, motorcycle cops, then two big black cars filled with big men in blonde felt hats pulled up in front of the school. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Four big marshals got out of the car, and from somewhere in the automobile, they extracted the littlest Negro girl you ever saw, dressed in shining starchy white, with new white shoes on feet so little they were almost round. Her face and little legs were very black against the white. The big marshals stood her on the curb, and a jangle of jeering shrieks went up from behind the barricades. The little girl did not look at the howling crowd, but from the side, the whites of her eyes showed like those of a frightened fawn. The men turned her around like a doll, and then the strange procession moved up the broad walk towards the school, and the child was even more a mite because the men were so big," close quote. Now, of the white man with the child, Steinbeck wrote the following, quote, "The papers had printed that the jibes and jeers were cruel and sometimes obscene, and so they were. But this was not the big show. The crowd was waiting for the white man who dared to bring his white child to school. And here he came along the guarded walk, a tall man dressed in light gray, leading his frightened child by the hand. His body was tensed as a strong leaf spring drawn to the breaking strain. His face was grave and gray, and his eyes were on the ground immediately ahead of him. The muscles of his cheeks stood out from clenched jaw, a man afraid who by his will held his fears in check as a great rider directs a panicked horse. A shrill, a grating voice rang out. The yelling was not in chorus. Each took a turn, and at the end of each, the crowd broke into howls and roars and whistles of applause. This is what they had come to see and hear. No newspaper had printed the words these women shouted. It was indicated that they were indelicate. Some even said obscene. On television, the soundtrack was made to blur or had crowd noises cut into cover. But now I heard the words, bestial and filthy and degenerate. My body churned with weary nausea," close quote. This was the New Orleans that Steinbeck witnessed that day, but one he did not recognize. He had been there many times in the past and, quote, "over the years had many friends there, thoughtful, gentle people with a tradition of kindness and courtesy," close quote. Steinbeck wondered where those people were, quote, "the ones who would be proud that they were of the species of the gray man, the one whose arms would ache to gather up the small, scared black mite," close quote. 43 years later, it was a New Orleans that I thankfully would not witness. As a newcomer, I wanted a broad view of the city. So I took a 2-hour guided bus tour of the town. The bus departed from a depot adjacent to the Mississippi River in the famous French Quarter of downtown New Orleans. We rode on well-known streets, Bourbon, Royal, Daphne, Burgundy, Decatur, Chartres, past the buildings with the iron rail balconies, past the cafes and shops, all teeming with people. The tour continued outside the French Quarter, past the many stately columned homes of New Orleans. We drove past the beautiful campus of Loyola University. All during the tour, a knowledgeable and funny guide pointed out the landmarks left and right of the bus. The bus tour was time well spent, especially for a new visitor to this marvelous city. Now, just a little aside, I want to tell you, remember, I was there on October 31st, Halloween. And I wanted to go to town Halloween Eve that evening, Halloween, to see the craziness in downtown. I just wanted to see it. But when I told the hotel clerk I wanted to do that, he suggested, "Nah, you shouldn't go because it could be really, really kind of crazy down there." Well, the next day at breakfast in the morning, I was at a breakfast table, and there were other people talking about the wonderful time they had seeing the craziness in the downtown New Orleans. I'm sorry I missed it, but I followed the advice of that hotel clerk, much to my annoyance later on. Okay. Well, I continued my journey east. As you can see in this map, this is my journey around the country. Continued my journey east. And from New Orleans, Steinbeck's and my journey diverged once again. Let me read you what I wrote on Sunday, November 2nd of 2003. After his visit to New Orleans, John Steinbeck began driving north toward Long Island and home. Our paths diverged once again as I continued driving east to visit my mother and stepfather in Florida. In Travels with Charley, Steinbeck writes nothing of the routes he took and cities he passed through to get from New Orleans back home, save only a brief mention of Jackson, Mississippi, and then Abingdon, Virginia. It was in Abingdon that his journey ended, not physically, but psychologically. He writes, quote, "My own journey started long before I left and was over before I returned. I know exactly where and when it was over, near Abingdon, in the dogleg of Virginia, at 4 o'clock of a windy afternoon. Without warning or goodbye or kiss my foot, my journey went away and left me stranded far from home. It is very strange. Up to Abingdon, Virginia, I can reel back the trip like film. I have an almost total recall. Every face is there, every hill and tree and color and sound of speech and small scenes ready to replay themselves in my memory. After Abingdon, nothing," close quote. From Abingdon, the journey home was a race with himself as Steinbeck drove Rocinante under a heavy foot. Even Charley knew the journey was at an end as he kept his head on Steinbeck's lap, no longer looking out the window as he loved to do. After driving more than 10,000 miles around the country over mountains, plains, and deserts, Steinbeck returned to New York and promptly got lost. He pulled over to the side of the street, turned the engine off, and started to laugh. He finally found his way home, thanks to a very understanding police officer. I took this journey in order to follow in the footsteps of John Steinbeck, retracing the path he and Charley took as they circumnavigated the United States. It has been a joy for me to do that, and to make the trip my own by visiting places that Steinbeck did not visit. Now that our paths have diverged for the final time, I feel as though this part of my journey is at an end. After resting for a week or two in Florida, I will continue my travels, but no longer using Travels with Charley as my guidebook. I have neither appointments to keep nor pressing matters to which I must return back home. I may visit the Florida Keys and perhaps spend a few days in Key West, or maybe I will turn northwards toward home, stopping along the way at places I've never been. Perhaps I will let the wind be my guide. I have all the time in the world. Little postscript. My own journey ended at 4 o'clock of a windy and snowy afternoon, 13, 2003, when I returned to Columbia, Connecticut, having driven Dapple a total of 12,181 miles. Again, here's our journeys, Steinbeck's journey on the top and my route on the bottom. So it was a joy to take this journey. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. So again, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have, or hear any comments that you might like to make. I'll be happy to put it. Let's see. How do I want to open up the microphones again? So I don't know how to do that, but you could turn on your mic if you want to. I guess if you want to say something. I guess that's how it works. Or raise your hand and I can recognize you or something like that. Okay, Harvey. Yeah, you have to unmute your microphone.
He's unmuted. His microphone isn't working.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Say it again. Sorry. I couldn't hear it. I'm sorry.
It's not working.
Muted again. He's muted again.
Oh, you're muted again, Harvey. That's why we can't hear you. There you go.
check to see if his computer sound is on. When my computer sound is off, it's as though I'm muted, even if I'm unmuted. So is your computer sound on, Harvey? Huh.
Okay, I'm sorry. We can't hear you, sorry.
Bruce.
Okay,
Bruce.
Dan?
Again, incredibly enjoyable. I enjoy your writing as well as Steinbeck's. You know, when you said what you did, what he said about the national parks, at first I thought, oh, that's sort of curmudgeonly or something, but actually then you show the picture of the Grand Canyon and it is absolutely not representative of the United States. Now, why he didn't appreciate its beauty, so that's a different matter, but it's true, the national parks are quite unusual in their beauty.
Yeah, I don't know why he felt that. Again, I wish he had visited the Grand Canyon to have seen it. I think it would have taken his breath away, just as it does to mine every time I see it.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Hey, you know what moved me? I mean, I've seen the earlier one, which was beautiful. Those pictures out in Dakota were tremendous with the cliffs and everything, and the way you explained it, the minerals. But when Steinbeck went to Salinas and went up on a mountain, that was amazing the way he described his childhood. I mean, that was wonderfully descriptive, and I was really moved by that. And then, of course, your commentary too. But that was amazing how he was talking to his dog, and the dog seemed to sense it, and he described what was going on from that vantage point. And I thought that was very moving. I really could visualize that, you know. Thank you.
Last week, you know, that's where I had to end because time ran out, and I wanted to read that to everybody so much because it was what he had to say about his view of that valley was so moving to me. So I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to come back to finish reading that.
No, I felt very moved by that, and I could visualize it. It was great. I really enjoyed your whole presentation. It was amazing, and your commentary. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, Bruce, how fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. But I was also wondering, how long was your journey, and how long was Steinbeck's journey?
Okay, I left on September 2nd and came back on November 13th. So about 2.5 months.
Wow.
I understand Steinbeck traveled a little over 3 months.
Okay, about the same. I mean, pretty close.
Yeah.
Very nice. That's really very cool. I like how you chronicled everything and all the photographs and narrative. Did you compile that before you made this presentation? Have you done this before?
Yes, I have done this presentation before. I did it in a couple of senior centers and actually in a synagogue in Hebron. I actually did it there too. So I have done this presentation before. But I added some things to this presentation and took some things away. So it's different. It's not the exact same presentation.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Gaby.
Thank you again. That was such a beautiful, moving presentation. I really think that your writing equals that of Steinbeck in various passages in which you talk about your own emotions, your own perspective, your own vision as you see what is unfolding before you. I have my own comment to make, if I may, about the fact that I had always looked at the U.S. and with the look of a child in grammar school, having this map, and we had to put these little pinpoints in, and we had to put in little stickers and things like that. So that never gave me a sense of the immensity, the grandeur of this country. But when you're talking about your travels, reminds me of the fact that Ernie, and at the time just David, went by train across trip when Ernie was going to be teaching summer school at the University of Washington, Seattle. And that really took my breath away when we were on that train for about 3 days and 3 nights. And all of a sudden, oh my God, there's the Mississippi River. Yes. I'm finally seeing the Mississippi River. I'm
Yeah.
seeing the plains, I'm seeing the fields, I'm seeing the peaks, and I took my breath away.
Well, those were milestones for me too. Going across to Mississippi, getting to Seattle, seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time, going across the Golden Gate Bridge. Those were big milestones for me. The Continental Divide, yeah, all along the way.
Bruce,
Yes.
Well,
Hi. Yes.
how you doing? Well, obviously it looked like a wonderful trip and it was a great presentation. And I always said I wanted to go on a safari with you, and now I know why. Now I know more than ever.
Okay, we got to go.
Anyway, Harvey's mic is broken. That's why you couldn't hear him.
Oh, okay, Harvey. Okay, so sorry we can't hear you. No, sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't the first one. How did you travel? Do you use personal car or how did you travel?
Yes, I used my car. Steinbeck used his pickup truck camper, but I didn't have that kind of vehicle, so I used my car.
So you stayed in hotels, motels on the way?
Yes, I stayed in hotels along the way. That's what I did. And I
Okay.
wrote my journal as I traveled. Each day, I wrote a little bit of my journal, what I did that day, and kept it up that way. By the way, I know I've said this. I know I said this last time, but if anyone would like a copy of my journal, I have a copy of it with all the photos. They're inside the journal, and I'd be happy to email it to you. It's about 11 megabyte file. It's not that big. So if anybody wants a copy of it, I'll be happy to send it your way.
So
Lance,
for the
yes.
most part you were staying off highways, right?
Sorry?
For the most part you were staying off highways, it's off interstate?
Yes, I tried to stay off major highways as much as I could. I couldn't always manage that. Steinbeck didn't give a detailed rendition of the roads he took, but he said he tried to stay off the major highways as much as he could. So I try to do the same thing. Yeah. Yes, Maxwell. Max.
Hi, Bruce. For Harvey, volume control, but if as an alternate, you can go to the chat box and convey your thoughts in that manner. Harvey?
Okay.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, you're welcome.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes, go ahead, Lance.
This is so timely. I'm glad you mentioned that about your journal. Cecilia and I would love to get a copy. And it's so timely because I just bought a recreational vehicle. And Cecilia and I are starting to plan to go on some places. So we can look at your journal and maybe follow your trip a little bit.
Okay.
Not quite all the way around the country, but maybe in small segments.
Okay. You want to talk, anytime you want to talk about where you might want to go, we can talk about that.
Well, we're ready.
Good. Okay. So, anybody else have a question or?
Yeah, Bruce,
Yes, go ahead.
if there were places like you'd like to go back to in particular, what would they be?
I would love to revisit Mount St. Helens. I know Steinbeck didn't go there, but I did. I'd love to see. This was back in 2003. I was there. I'd love to see what it's like today. I know they kind of left it like a laboratory. They're letting it grow back naturally. They're not doing anything to around the mountain. They did plant millions of trees in the area that were blown down, but around the mountain itself, it's a laboratory. I'd love to go back again today to see what's happening there, and I'd love to visit the Redwood Forest again. It's just such a magical place. I'd love to visit there again as well, and among other places that I'd like to visit.
It was
Yeah,
a great presentation. I really enjoyed it.
thank you very much. Really do appreciate it very much. Okay, Ella.
Yeah, I have a question about Monterey Bay. You kind of skipped, I think it was towards the end of the last hour, so you didn't really stay too long about that. But do you see it, like, one of my favorite books is Terra Flat. And I was wondering if you see any of those, I don't know, environments, places, if they're still.
Well,
type of atmosphere.
Yeah, well, I did visit Monterey, and I went to a boat dock area, and had a leisurely breakfast there. I actually saw some seals in the water, which was really kind of fun. But I forget Steinbeck's book where he wrote about factories in Monterey.
Yeah, that's Tortilla Flat and Cranberry, not Cranberry, something Row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All those factories are gone now. Now they say they fish for tourists instead of fishing for for what was in the water. Yeah, all those factories are gone.
And so they don't have anything that they left for people who go following Steinbeck, like a memorial or a little museum or anything out there?
Well, there's the Steinbeck Center, the National Steinbeck Center in
Salinas. Yeah.
Yes, it's a beautiful museum, beautiful place. It's very close to Monterey. It's very, very close. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Yes, Seema.
Bruce, thank you so much yet again. But that Monterey, the Steinbeck Center in Salinas was something that was really a surprise to me. And I wonder if you, I know you enjoyed the lunch and seeing the car and all, but were there other things there that particularly excited you?
Well, I wrote in detail in my journal about what I saw in the Steinbeck Center, and it's divided into sections. His writings, his early writings and mid writings. He was also a war correspondent during World War II. He was also a scientist. He sailed in the Sea of Cortez for quite a while, and he did scientific research in the Sea of Cortez. He wrote about that in a book, so all that is in the museum. It all talks about that detail is in my journal. The things I saw there, but yes, there's lots in there. It's a wonderful place. You know what I did also when I walked into the Steinbeck Center, I went up to the docent, and I said to him, "Gee, I want you to know that I'm retracing John Steinbeck's journey around the country. What do you think of that?" He said, "Well, we just had a motorcycle group come through. They're doing the same thing." So it's not. I thought of. I'm not the first person who ever did this, and I won't be the last, I'm sure. So, yeah. So it's a great place. Great place. Anybody else have a question or anything? Again, if you like my journal, I'd be happy to send it to you. I forgot Seema. Did Seema want? Lance wants a copy of it, and I forget who else. Oh, Kathleen. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. Well, I know that Minion's going to be starting in about 15 minutes, and so I'm sure you're all going to want to switch to that URL. So I look forward to seeing you there.